Marcus Reed had spent 6 months working himself to exhaustion to buy a car for his girlfriend, the woman he believed would become his son's new family. Everything was planned perfectly for a November afternoon, but when Marcus drove the new car home earlier than expected, what he walked into wasn't joy. It was a scene in the house he paid rent for, a strange man, a secret meeting, and a truth that made his legs give out beneath him. What could make a strong father collapse right where he stood? Marcus Reed woke at 5:30 in the morning, the way he always did. The alarm hadn't gone off yet. His body had learned to wake before it needed to be told. He lay there in the dark for a moment, listening to the silence of the house, then swung his legs out of bed and padded quietly down the hallway. The rental house was small, 2 bedrooms with thin walls, and he'd learned to move through it without making noise. In the kitchen, he pulled eggs from the fridge and set a pan on the stove. The routine was automatic now: scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. Jayden liked his eggs soft, not too dry. Marcus had burned them once, 4 years ago, the week after his ex-wife left. Jayden had eaten them anyway without complaint, and Marcus had promised himself he'd never let that happen again. A good father got the small things right. Jayden shuffled into the kitchen at 6:15, still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He was 8 years old, small for his age, with his mother's nose and Marcus's eyes. He climbed onto the chair at the kitchen table and watched his father work at the stove. "Dad," Jayden said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Do you love Miss Alyssa?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder. The question caught him off guard, though it shouldn't have. Kids noticed everything. "Why do you ask that?" Marcus said. Jayden shrugged. "I don't know. You're always happy when she's here." Marcus plated the eggs and brought them to the table. He sat down across from his son and thought about how to answer. The truth was simple, but saying it out loud made it real in a way that scared him. "I think she's going to be your new mom," Marcus said quietly. Jayden looked at him, then down at his eggs. He didn't say anything. Marcus waited, but the boy just started eating. That was the end of it. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a football, was a photo from 3 months ago. Marcus, Jayden, and Alyssa at the park. The 3 of them stood in front of the duck pond, smiling. But when Marcus looked at it now, he noticed something he hadn't before. Alyssa was standing a little to the side, not quite in the frame with them. Her smile was bright, but her body was angled away, like she'd been caught mid-step. Alyssa taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. She was 34, 5 years younger than Marcus, with dark hair she wore pulled back in a ponytail most days. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention, and smart in a way that made Marcus feel like he needed to read more. They'd been dating for 10 months. Marcus had brought up the future twice, once at dinner, once in the car on the way back from a movie. Both times, Alyssa had smiled and said she needed time. She hadn't said no. She just hadn't said yes. There were small things that nagged at him. Alyssa rarely posted photos of them together on social media. When she did, Marcus noticed. It was always just the 2 of them, never with Jayden. She'd met Marcus's sister once, at a barbecue, and had been polite but distant. When Marcus suggested she come to Jayden's school talent show, she'd said she had a staff meeting. Still, he loved her. That part was certain, and love, he believed, was supposed to be enough. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been working extra shifts on weekends. He told Alyssa and Jayden it was just the job getting busy, which wasn't entirely a lie. He managed construction projects, mostly commercial buildings, and there was always more work than there were hours in the day. But the weekend shifts were optional. Marcus had volunteered for them. He was saving for a car, a Honda CR-V, white pearl, 2023 model. Alyssa had mentioned it once, months ago, when they'd driven past a dealership. She'd said it was pretty. That was all. But Marcus had remembered. He wanted to surprise her. More than that, he wanted to prove something, that he could provide, that he wasn't the kind of man who made promises he couldn't keep. His ex-wife had walked out when Jayden was 4, saying Marcus worked too much, but the money was never quite enough to feel secure. Marcus didn't want Alyssa to ever feel that way. So he worked, he saved, and he kept it quiet. By the time Friday came, Marcus had enough. He took the afternoon off work, telling his crew he had a family emergency. He'd dropped Jayden at his sister Angela's place Thursday evening, saying he needed the weekend to handle some things. He drove to the dealership, signed the papers, and drove the CRV off the lot at 1:30 in the afternoon. The plan was simple. He'd drive the car home and park it in front of the house. Alyssa got off work at 3:30 most days. She'd see it when she pulled up. Marcus had bought red roses, a dozen of them, and he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say. Something about the future. Something about how he wanted her to know she was safe with him, that he could take care of her and Jayden both. But 2 weeks earlier, something had happened that Marcus couldn't quite shake. He'd been sitting on the couch with Alyssa, scrolling through his phone, when hers had buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a message. Marcus hadn't meant to look, but the name caught his eye. Just a letter. P. The preview of the message read, "I'm still thinking about it. This could change everything." Marcus had glanced at Alyssa. She'd picked up the phone quickly, read the message, and set it back down without saying anything. "Everything okay?" Marcus had asked. Alyssa had smiled. "Just a coworker, boring school stuff." Marcus had nodded and gone back to his phone, but the message stuck with him. A week after that, Marcus had driven to Alyssa's school to pick her up. She'd asked him to, said her car was making a weird noise. When Marcus pulled into the parking lot, he saw her standing near the front gate, talking to a man in a dark suit. The man was tall, clean-cut, with the kind of posture that said he worked in an office. He was holding a folder. Alyssa saw Marcus and waved. She said something to the man, then walked over to the truck. The man stayed where he was, watching. "Who was that?" Marcus asked as Alyssa climbed into the passenger seat. "Oh, that's Preston," Alyssa said lightly. "He's an education consultant, works with the district sometimes." Marcus glanced back at the man. Preston had turned away and was walking toward a black sedan parked across the street. "What did he want?" Marcus asked. Alyssa shrugged. "Just talking about some new curriculum stuff. Boring." Marcus had let it go. But he remembered the way Preston had looked at him when they'd made eye contact. Not hostile, exactly, just measuring. Now, driving through the city streets toward home, Marcus pushed those thoughts away. Today was supposed to be good. He'd worked hard for this. He'd earned it. He turned onto his street at 2:30 in the afternoon, an hour earlier than he'd planned. He wanted to check the house, make sure everything was clean, maybe put the roses in a vase before Alyssa arrived. But as he rounded the corner, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Alyssa's car was already parked in front of the house. Marcus slowed down, confused. She was supposed to be at work until 3:30. He checked the time on the dashboard. 2:32. She shouldn't be here. He parked the Honda 2 houses down, got out, and walked slowly toward his front door. The street was quiet. A neighbor was mowing their lawn 3 houses over, but otherwise, everything was still. Marcus stopped at the edge of his driveway and looked at the house. The living room curtains were drawn. That was strange. Alyssa usually left them open. He could hear voices inside, muffled and indistinct. He walked up the steps to the front door and slid his key into the lock. It turned quietly. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing he saw was the laptop on the coffee table. The screen was facing away from him, but he could hear voices coming from it. A video call. The second thing he saw was Alyssa, sitting on the couch, wearing a navy blazer he'd never seen before. She wasn't dressed for teaching. She looked like she was dressed for an interview. Sitting next to her was Preston. Marcus froze. Alyssa didn't see him at first. She was focused on the laptop screen. Preston was leaning forward slightly, his hands folded in his lap. On the screen, Marcus could make out 3 people in what looked like a conference room. One of them, a man in his 50s with graying hair, was speaking. "So, Alyssa, are you ready to relocate to Atlanta? We need your answer by Monday." The words hit Marcus like a fist to the stomach. Relocate. Atlanta, Monday. Alyssa opened her mouth to respond, but then she turned her head and saw Marcus standing in the doorway. Her face went pale. For 5 seconds, no one said anything. Preston reached over and muted the laptop. The voices on the screen kept moving, but there was no sound now. Just silence. Marcus stared at Alyssa. Alyssa stared back at Marcus. Preston looked down at his hands. Marcus found his voice, though it didn't sound like his own. It was thin and unsteady. "Why are you home early?" It was a stupid question. He knew it as soon as he said it, but it was the only thing his brain could produce. Alyssa stood up quickly. Her hands moved to smooth down her blazer, a nervous gesture. "I thought you were on a work trip," she said, her voice tight. Marcus didn't answer. He looked at Preston. Preston met his eyes for a moment, then looked away. The laptop screen was still on. The 3 people in the conference room were still talking, their mouths moving silently. Marcus took a step back toward the door. His legs felt weak. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he understood enough. This wasn't teaching. This was something else. Something Alyssa had kept from him. He turned and walked out of the house. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. His throat had closed up. Behind him, he heard Alyssa call his name, but he didn't stop. He walked down the steps, across the driveway, and stood in the middle of the street, staring at the Honda parked 2 houses down. The car he'd bought for her. The car that was supposed to prove he could give her the life she deserved. He'd been wrong about everything. Alyssa came out of the house 30 seconds later. Marcus was still standing in the street. He heard her footsteps behind him but didn't turn around. "Marcus, please," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Let me explain." He turned slowly. She was standing on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, even though it was nearly 70 degrees. Preston was standing in the doorway behind her, watching but not moving. "Explain what?" Marcus said. His voice came out flat, drained of everything. Alyssa glanced back at Preston, then stepped closer to Marcus. She kept her voice low. "That was a job interview," she said quickly. "A company called EduVision. They're an education consulting firm. They want me to be their director of curriculum development in Atlanta." Marcus felt the words land, but couldn't process them. Director. Atlanta. These were real things, concrete things, but they didn't fit with anything he knew about their life. "When were you going to tell me?" he asked. Alyssa looked down at the pavement. "I don't know. I wasn't sure I was going to take it. I'm still not sure." Marcus stared at her. "You're not sure. It's a big opportunity," Alyssa said, her words coming faster now. "The pay is more than double what I make now. It's a leadership position. I'd be designing curricula for schools across the Southeast." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood ambition. He understood wanting more. What he didn't understand was why she'd hidden it. "Who's he?" Marcus asked, nodding toward Preston. Alyssa glanced back again. Preston had stepped inside and closed the door, giving them space. "He's a headhunter," Alyssa said. "He reached out to me 2 months ago. He's been helping me prepare my application, coaching me for interviews. 2 months. Marcus did the math in his head. 2 months ago, he'd been picking up extra weekend shifts, saving for the car. 2 months ago, Alyssa had told him she loved him for the first time. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked again. Alyssa's eyes were wet now. She wiped at them with the back of her hand. "Because I knew you'd ask me not to go," she said quietly. The honesty of it hit him harder than any lie could have. She was right. He would have asked her not to go. But she hadn't given him the chance. "Did you think about me at all?" Marcus asked. "About Jayden?" Alyssa's face crumpled. "Of course I did. I've been thinking about nothing else for weeks. That's why I haven't decided yet." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "You haven't decided?" "No," Alyssa said. "I haven't." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew. Alyssa looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Not about the job. About him. "I don't know," she said softly. "I thought maybe you and Jayden could move to Atlanta later, after I get settled." Later. After. Marcus turned the words over in his mind. They sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath, they meant something else. They meant she was going first. Alone. They meant he wasn't part of the plan. Not really. How much later? Marcus asked. Alyssa didn't answer. That was answer enough. Marcus looked past her, toward the house. He thought about the 6 months he'd spent saving, the extra shifts. He'd done it all because he thought he was building something. A future. A family. But Alyssa had been planning her own future, one that didn't include him. At least not at the start. I need to go, Marcus said. Alyssa reached for his arm. Marcus, please don't leave like this. Can we talk? Marcus gently pulled his arm away. I don't think I can do that right now. He walked to the Honda, got in, and started the engine. Alyssa stood on the sidewalk, watching him. He didn't look at her as he drove past. Marcus drove for an hour without thinking, just moving through the city streets on autopilot. When he finally stopped, he was parked outside a small diner near the industrial district where he worked. He sat in the car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The truth was settling in now. Alyssa had been planning to leave. Maybe not forever, but long enough that she couldn't promise when or if she'd come back. And she'd kept it from him. Not because she was cruel, but because she hadn't known how to tell him she wasn't sure he was worth staying for. He'd been the only one who thought this was permanent. 2 days later, Marcus was at a construction site when his phone buzzed. It was an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, Regarding Alyssa Monroe. Marcus opened it. The message was short. Mr. Reed, my name is Preston Calls. We met briefly at your home on Friday. I need to speak with you about Alyssa's situation with EduVision. This is urgent. Please call me at your earliest convenience. There was a phone number at the bottom. Marcus stared at the email. The word urgent stuck with him. Marcus stepped away from the site and called the number. Preston answered on the second ring. Mr. Reed, thank you for calling. What do you want? Marcus asked. I need to meet with you, Preston said. In person. There's something you need to know about EduVision. I don't care about EduVision, Marcus said. Preston's voice was steady, insistent. You will. This concerns Alyssa. She's about to make a mistake that could ruin her career. Marcus didn't respond right away. He wanted to hang up. But something in Preston's tone stopped him. Where? Marcus asked. They met at a coffee shop downtown that afternoon. Preston was already there when Marcus arrived, sitting at a corner table with a folder in front of him. He stood when Marcus walked in and shook his hand. I appreciate you coming, Preston said as they sat down. Marcus didn't order anything. He just wanted this over with. What's this about? Marcus asked. Preston opened the folder and slid a stack of papers across the table. Marcus glanced down at them. They were contracts, emails, printouts of articles. EduVision isn't what they claim to be, Preston said. They recruit talented teachers and use them as fronts for fraudulent education programs. They apply for government grants, promise to deliver high-quality curriculum development, then deliver substandard work while pocketing the difference. The teachers become the public face of the scam. When it falls apart, the teachers take the blame. Marcus felt his stomach turn. And Alyssa? She's their next target, Preston said. They've been courting her for months. If she signs that contract, she'll be complicit in fraud, whether she knows it or not. And when the state starts investigating, she'll be the one they come after. Marcus stared at the papers in front of him. There were emails from people he didn't recognize, legal filings, news articles about other teachers who'd been caught up in similar schemes. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. Why not tell Alyssa? Preston sat back in his chair. I tried. She doesn't trust me. She thinks I'm jealous, or that I'm trying to sabotage her opportunity. But I saw the way you looked at her the other day. You care about her. She'll listen to you. Marcus shook his head slowly. I don't think she will. Preston studied him for a moment. Maybe not, but you should try. Because if she goes to Atlanta and signs that contract, her life is going to fall apart. Marcus looked down at the folder again. He didn't owe Alyssa anything. She'd made it clear that he wasn't part of her future. but he still cared. He couldn't just let her walk into this blind. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. Preston's expression darkened. "I used to work for them. I recruited teachers, convinced them to sign on. I didn't know what they were doing at first. By the time I figured it out, it was too late. 3 people I recruited lost their teaching licenses. One of them went to jail. I can't undo that. But I can stop them from doing it again." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood guilt. He understood wanting to fix something broken. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus asked. Preston pushed the folder toward him. "Show her this. Make her see what she's getting into." Marcus took the folder and stood up. Preston stood as well. "Good luck," Preston said. Marcus didn't respond. He walked out of the coffee shop and got back in the Honda. That evening, Marcus drove to Alyssa's apartment. He'd texted her earlier, asking if they could talk. She'd said yes. When she opened the door, she looked tired. She was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Come in," she said softly. Marcus stepped inside. The apartment was small, neat, filled with books and framed photos of places Alyssa had traveled before they met. They sat on the couch. Marcus set the folder on the coffee table between them. "What's that?" Alyssa asked. "Information about Eduvision," Marcus said. "Preston gave it to me." Alyssa's face tightened. "Marcus, I don't want to hear this. Preston's been trying to sabotage me from the start." "Just look at it," Marcus said quietly. "Please." Alyssa hesitated, then reached for the folder. She opened it and started reading. Marcus watched her face as she went through the pages. At first, she looked skeptical, then confused, then something else. Fear. She read for a long time without speaking. When she finally looked up, her hands were shaking. "This can't be real," she said, though her voice was weak. "Preston says it is," Marcus said. "He used to work for them. He's trying to stop them." Alyssa set the folder down. Her shoulders trembled. "I turned down 2 other offers because of this one," she said, her voice breaking. "I told them I was committed." Marcus didn't say anything. Alyssa lowered her hands and looked at him. Her eyes were red. "I almost gave up everything for this," she whispered. "I almost left my job, left my life here, left you." Marcus felt the words hit him, but they didn't land the way she probably thought they would. Because the truth was, she had been ready to leave. The only reason she hadn't was because the opportunity turned out to be fake. But if it had been real, she would have gone. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. Alyssa wiped her eyes. "I don't know. I need to call them. I need to tell them I'm not taking the position." Marcus nodded. "That's probably smart." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Alyssa reached for his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing this to me. You didn't have to." Marcus looked down at their hands. Her fingers were cold. "Do you think we can fix this?" Alyssa asked quietly. "Do you think we still have a chance?" Marcus pulled his hand back gently. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the person he'd thought he knew. But he also saw the truth now. She'd never been as sure about him as he'd been about her. She'd kept him at arm's length, not because she didn't care, but because she hadn't decided if he was worth staying for, and when the offer came, she'd chosen bigger. She just hadn't gotten the chance to follow through. "I don't think so," Marcus said. Alyssa's face crumpled. "Marcus, please. I made a mistake. I should have told you." "It's not about that," Marcus said. "It's about the fact that you were ready to go. And the only reason you're here now is because the job fell through. If it had been real, you'd be packing right now." Alyssa didn't deny it. She couldn't. "I love you," she said, her voice desperate. "That has to count for something." Marcus stood up. He looked around the apartment one last time. "It does," he said. "But it's not enough." He walked to the door. Alyssa didn't follow him. She stayed on the couch, her face buried in her hands, crying quietly. Marcus closed the door behind him and walked to the Honda. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. Then he started the engine and drove home. Marcus didn't go inside when he got home. He sat in the Honda in the driveway, engine off, hands still on the wheel. The house was dark, except for the porch light he'd left on that morning. Jayden was at his sister's place for the weekend. Now the house was empty, and the silence felt heavier than it should. He got out of the car and walked up the steps. Inside, everything looked the same. The couch where Alyssa and Preston had been sitting. The coffee table where the laptop had been. It had only been 2 days, but it felt like years. Marcus sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. He tried to think about what came next, but his mind kept circling back to the same question. How had he not seen it? How had he convinced himself that someone who kept him at a distance was building a future with him? The truth was, he had seen it. He'd just chosen not to believe it. He'd told himself that love was supposed to be patient, that if he just kept showing up, kept proving himself, she'd eventually choose him, but she hadn't. And maybe she never would have. Marcus thought about his ex-wife. She'd left 4 years ago, walked out when Jayden was 4. Barely a word and never came back. He'd spent a long time after that trying to figure out what he'd done wrong. He'd worked too much. He hadn't worked enough. He'd made himself into a checklist of failures and promised himself he'd do better next time. With Alyssa, he thought he had. He'd been careful. He'd been patient. He'd listened when she talked, showed up when she needed him, gave her space when she asked for it. He'd done everything right. But it still hadn't been enough. Because the problem wasn't what he'd done. The problem was that she'd never been as invested as he was, and no amount of effort on his part could change that. It was almost midnight when Marcus heard footsteps on the porch. He looked up, confused. No one should be here. Then he heard a small knock on the door. He opened it and found Jayden standing there, wearing his pajamas and holding his backpack. Marcus's sister, Angela, was standing behind him, her arms crossed. He wouldn't stop asking to come home, Angela said, her voice tired but not unkind. Said he had a bad feeling. I figured it was easier to just bring him. Marcus looked down at Jayden. The boy was staring up at him with those big, worried eyes. Thanks, Marcus said to Angela. She nodded and walked back to her car. Marcus stepped aside and let Jayden in. The boy dropped his backpack by the door and walked into the living room. He climbed onto the couch and sat there, looking small in the dim light. Marcus closed the door and sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Why aren't you sleeping? Marcus asked finally. Jayden shrugged. I don't know. I just wanted to come home. Marcus put his arm around his son and pulled him close. Jayden leaned against him, his small body warm and solid. Is Miss Alyssa coming back? Jayden asked quietly. The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been so focused on his own pain that he hadn't thought about how this would affect Jayden. The boy had liked Alyssa. Marcus had made her part of their life without knowing if she wanted to stay. No, Marcus said softly. She's not. Jayden didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked up at his father. Did she leave like Mom did? Marcus felt his chest tighten. He didn't know how to explain this in a way that an 8-year-old would understand. Not exactly, Marcus said. But yeah, kind of. Jayden nodded like that made sense to him. Then he said something that made Marcus's throat close up. Dad, I think it's okay if it's just us. Marcus looked down at his son. The boy wasn't crying. He wasn't upset. He just looked calm, like he'd thought about it and come to a decision. You think so? Marcus asked, his voice rough. Jayden nodded. Yeah, we're good together. Just me and you. Marcus pulled his son closer and didn't say anything. He didn't trust himself to speak. Because Jayden was right. They were good together. They always had been. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it had always been enough. And Marcus had just been too scared to believe it. They sat there for a long time, and eventually Jayden fell asleep against his father's shoulder. Marcus carried him upstairs and tucked him into bed. Then he went back downstairs and sat in the dark, thinking. The next morning, Alyssa called. Marcus saw her name on the screen and almost didn't answer. But he did, because he knew they needed to finish this properly. Hi, she said when he picked up. Her voice was quiet, fragile. Hi, Marcus said. There was a long silence. Marcus waited. He didn't have anything left to say. I called EduVision, Alyssa said finally. I told them I wasn't taking the job. You were right. It was a scam. I could have lost everything. I'm glad you're okay, Marcus said, and he meant it. I've been thinking, Alyssa said, about us, about what you said, and I think you're wrong. Marcus closed his eyes. He didn't want to do this again. I do love you, Alyssa continued. I know I screwed up. I know I should have told you about the job, but I was scared. Scared of making the wrong choice. Scared of giving up an opportunity I might never get again. But I see now that I was wrong. I want to try again. I want to make this work. Marcus listened to her words and felt nothing. Not anger, not hope, just a kind of tired certainty. Do you really? He asked quietly. Alyssa didn't answer right away. What do you mean? Do you really want to make this work? Marcus said. Or do you just feel bad because the job fell through and you're trying to salvage what's left? That's not fair, Alyssa said, her voice rising. Maybe not, Marcus said. But it's true. Alyssa was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was small. What do you want me to say, Marcus? I want you to be honest, Marcus said. With me and with yourself. If that job had been real, would you still be calling me right now? Alyssa didn't answer. The silence stretched out between them, and Marcus knew. He'd always known, deep down. He just needed her to admit it. I thought so, Marcus said softly. Marcus, I'm sorry, Alyssa said, and now she was crying. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, Marcus said, but it did, and I can't keep pretending that's okay. So that's it? Alyssa asked. We're done? Marcus looked out the window at the Honda parked in the driveway. Yeah, Marcus said. We're done. Alyssa didn't say anything else. After a moment, the line went dead. Marcus set the phone down and sat there for a while, letting the finality of it settle over him. It hurt, but it also felt right. That afternoon, Marcus drove the Honda back to the dealership. The salesman who'd sold it to him looked confused when Marcus walked in and asked to return it. Sir, you just bought this 3 days ago, the salesman said. I know, Marcus said, but the person I bought it for doesn't exist. The salesman didn't know what to say to that. He called the manager. They worked out the paperwork. Marcus lost $2,000 in cancellation fees and depreciation, but he didn't care. The money didn't matter. It never had. He walked out of the dealership and took an Uber home. His old pickup truck was still parked in the driveway, dusty and dented but reliable. He'd bought it used 10 years ago and it had never let him down. He climbed in, started the engine, and felt something like relief. 2 weeks later, Marcus took Jayden to the park. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and clear, and the playground was full of kids. They got ice cream from the truck near the entrance and sat on a bench, watching the children run and shout. Jayden was eating a chocolate cone, his face already smeared with melted ice cream. He looked happy. Lighter, somehow, than he'd been in months. Dad, Jayden said, pointing toward the swings. There's a new girl over there. Do you think I should ask her to play? Marcus looked where his son was pointing. A girl about Jayden's age was sitting on a swing, kicking her legs but not really swinging. Do you want to? Marcus asked. Jayden thought about it, then nodded. Yeah, I think so. Then go ahead, Marcus said. Jayden jumped off the bench and ran toward the swings. Marcus watched him go, watched him approach the girl and say something that made her smile. They started swinging together, laughing, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not happiness, exactly, but something close to it. Something like hope. He thought about the last 10 months, about everything he'd tried to build with Alyssa. All the extra shifts, all the careful planning, all the ways he'd tried to prove he was enough, and in the end, none of it had mattered. You couldn't make someone choose you. You couldn't earn love by working hard enough or sacrificing enough or being patient enough. Either it was there or it wasn't. Marcus had spent so long trying to be the kind of man someone would stay for. But maybe the real lesson was finding someone who wanted to stay, who didn't need to be convinced. He leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes, feeling the sun on his face. He thought about what came next. There would be more work, more bills, more late nights and early mornings, but there would also be this. Jayden, laughing on the swings, ice cream on Saturday afternoons. A life that was simple and small, but whole. People said love was about giving without expecting anything in return. But there was one thing Marcus had learned he couldn't give away: his self-respect, his sense of his own worth, the knowledge that he deserved someone who chose him, not someone he had to convince to stay. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Jayden. The boy was still swinging, higher now, his legs pumping hard. He looked free, happy. Marcus stood up and walked toward the playground. Jayden saw him coming and waved. Marcus waved back. They stayed at the park until the sun started to set, painting the sky orange and pink. Then they walked home together, father and son, side by side. It wasn't everything Marcus had hoped for, but it was enough. It had always been enough.